Hello, and welcome to Building Loved Businesses, where we explore what it takes to create companies that people love to work for, buy from, and partner with. I'm your host, Nathan Schock, and today I'm joined by Max Kringen, founder of Tellwell, a creative studio that helps brands and causes connect with their audience through story-based design and film. Max has spent over a decade using storytelling frameworks to blend strategy and creativity, helping nonprofits, higher education, and change makers connect with their audience in meaningful ways. Really excited to have you here today, Max. And let's start with your story. Take us back to the early days before Tellwell and just how Tellwell came to be.
Absolutely. Hi, Nathan, and thanks for having me. Um, Tellwell is a fun and delightful and slightly weird origin story, probably not dissimilar from lots of other accidental agency owners or creative studio owners. Um, I got my start in healthcare marketing. And even before healthcare marketing, I worked for a promotional products company called Brand Folk. And when I was in healthcare marketing, what we really saw was we were spending gobs of money, like wildly large amounts of money on just like really basic things. And this was at that time around social media. And so I worked for a large Midwestern healthcare organization that might be really large in Fargo and Sioux Falls that we won't name, but at that time, over 10 years ago, we were spending $20,000 to $40,000 a month on social media, like Facebook and Twitter, and like the strategy, and I say strategy with air quotes, really liberally, because really what we were trying to do was we were just trying to get out ahead of the curve. And so when I was like 22, 23, they brought me in to do social media and do social media strategy for the enterprise. One of the things that I was charged with at 22, 23 was helping to manage the agency relationships as it related to that. And one of the things that I kept experiencing was I would leave meetings way less energized with those agencies. I would leave them way less energized. I would leave feeling like, God, I'm not a very good creative. I'm not a very good strategist. I'm not a very good X, Y, and Z. And I was like, that just feels wrong. And that's really where like the idea behind Tellwell was born, is like, how do we create experiences where we can be helping with creative, helping with strategy, helping with these things, and then bring clients in to like educate them as well. And so while we're executing on some of the things for them, educating along the way. My parents are both educators, and my dad says, because he's a pretty Midwestern quiet guy, but the best way to show somebody that you love them is to teach them something. And so throughout our time at Tellwell, we're always trying to teach you something, whether it's just about the process or about the language that we use around creative and those types of things. So really, what we tried to do is about 10 years ago, we started Tellwell, and it was a side gig. We did our Tellwell Tuesdays, and we're able to do all of our work in about 4 hours a week on from 5 to 8 or 9 p.m. every Tuesday night. And then I was employed at that time by a tech startup here in Fargo, and I got the boot. I was fired because I was a terrible employee. I was the smartest person in the room. Nobody could teach me anything. Like, I didn't have much to learn from anybody. And I got the boot, and I was like, oh, okay. And so at that time, we had garnered like 5 or 6 clients. After I had had a couple of like woe is me cocktails, I emailed all of them and met with all of them the very next day. And then we took Tellwell full time from there. And really, since then, our whole goal is to be connecting folks with their audiences through the power of story. And so that's like the 90-second version
Yeah,
of Tellwell's origin story. But really,
yeah,
our
that's
whole
great.
goal is to create connection above the noise.
Yeah, that's great. So At least we have one thing in common. We've both been fired before. So, but my story's for another time. Now, right when you're talking 10 years ago in social media, like that's ancient days. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
And one of the things we saw early on in social media is that brands would treat it just like any other broadcast media, right? It's just a way to push out our messages. And when you started Tellwell, you had a different idea, right? That the way marketing has been done, not only will it not work on social media, but social media is changing everything, right? So it has to, the way that brands communicate with their audience has to change. So talk to us about that pivot, about going from that broadcast style to more intentional storytelling.
Yeah. So I think one of the most challenging things about social, especially 10 years ago, especially for brands, is because nobody was doing it. Nobody knew how to do it well. Nobody knew what the role was. And so, to your point, yes, everybody was using it as a broadcast platform. One of the cool things that we did in that big healthcare organization was we really started to reposition it from a broadcast medium into a storytelling platform. And so the way that we talk about this sometimes is like there's a huge difference between just posting content and and telling stories that build relationships. And so those broadcast mediums, and we know this today in a 24-hour news cycle, but the same thing existed 5 and 10 years ago, that organizations didn't need to create more noise. What they really needed was narratives to invite their audiences into their mission, because as old as story is really what turns strangers into friends and friends into champions. And so by sharing stories of people that looked like them, sounded like them, smelled like them, what they were doing was they were inviting folks into stories. And that's really how we created like the foundation for what Tellwell is today, is by sharing really great stories that allows folks to see themselves in those stories. So they say, oh, I can experience the same change that this person did. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really like the crux of it.
Yeah. Now, there's also, right, there's this conviction that you obviously bring to it, right? That this is the better way to do things. But again, if we go back 10 years ago, for those brands that actually had the, the courage to step into social media, they were getting traction just by being there, right? Right.
Yes.
So now you have this conviction that there's a better way to do it, but they're like, hey, we're already kind of seeing some results here, some engagement. So how do you talk to them about making that transition, and really what happened as they started to, tell more of a narrative and more of a story, and invite people into it, as you said?
Yeah. So early on in Tellwell days, our clients were primarily nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. And so while just being out there and being active, there were some vanity metrics that came with it. But then when we started to ask the questions about like, is this moving the needle? And what is the needle that we're trying to move? Are we trying to increase fundraising dollars? Are we trying to garner more support? Are we trying to build our email list? Are we just building a social presence to create a social presence? And are we just going for how many likes do we have and those types of things? When we started to ask those slightly harder questions, like why do we want to be on social media? Why do we want to be connecting with our audiences? And then we started to get that deeper. If you're familiar with like the five whys, like if you actually want to get to the crux of why we're of the purpose of something, you ask why 5 times. And so when we boiled all those down, what we were finding out was like the belief was like if our audience is bigger and we can connect with more folks through our story, then we can garner more money. Right? Because every nonprofit organization needs to make more money so that way they can further the mission. And so, as we started to boil that down a little bit and we realized, hey, these vanity metrics, they're fine, but what we actually need to do is we need to invite people into an adventure. We need to invite people into our story so that way they can become our champions and then they will give us money. right? And not that everything has to boil down to money, but it
Yeah.
kind of does. And so that was really the turning point for us where we said, okay, great. Now let's go beyond those vanity metrics and let's actually invite people in so that way they can see themselves in the story and want to be a part of the mission.
Yeah. I love that. Right. And yes, you don't have to apologize about money, right? Because if there's no margin, there's no mission. But
Ooh,
one of the things I love about Tellwell is you guys have a very clear definition of what kind of a client fits the work that you do. But you also have this desire to raise the level of all mission driven organizations and their storytelling. And so, what I want to do here is shift this to almost a storytelling workshop, right? So,
yeah.
what, one of the things I love too is how you use some frameworks that to drive your work, so that there's a repeatable process to your creativity. And you mentioned the five whys, but there's another why, and that's one of the first frameworks that you go through. So let's just maybe work our way through some of those frameworks and help people think about how they would develop their story. So start there.
Man, now we're going to get nerdy. And this is where I get really excited because as we start talking about these things, these are not frameworks that we developed. They're ones that we've like curated and kind of like layered on top of each other to create some really, really powerful narratives. We're like firm believers that frameworks do not box us in. What they really do is they give us structure to be more creative. And I think for a lot of nonprofits, I think for a lot of mission driven organizations and just creatives in general, they believe that, like, if there's a process, that's actually not a good thing because in order to be truly creative, we just have to have an open thing.
Yeah.
And I really like to think about this in terms of like a sandbox versus a desert. If you go into a desert and you're told, like, just create, you're going to be like, where the hell do I start?
Right.
Versus when you're in a sandbox, you have memories, you have references, you have a physical barrier, likelihood that you can see a bucket across the yard and you're like, oh, I remember now, that can be the foundation for my castle or whatever that is. And that's how we really love to talk about frameworks. And so the first framework that we just mentioned is Simon Sinek's Start with Why.
Mhm.
And the idea behind this is that in order to get to the what and the how, which most people start with the how does it get done, is when you figure out the why, that really influences everything else and allows you to go back to that true north. And so Simon Sinek is brilliant and, magical in all of his ways. I've switched his framework up just a little bit to make it resonate more with like our team and our audiences. And so why is still very much at the middle. That is the epicenter. And when we can figure out the why, then we can start to figure out the what we need to get done, and then we figure out the how. And so that's the first big one, is Simon Sinek Start with Why. And because so many people start with how does this get done, that's what kills ideas and it's what kills creativity. Versus if we jump back a couple layers and we start with why are we wanting to tell this story? Why are we wanting to launch this campaign? Why are we wanting to raise more money in the first place?
Mm. Yeah, and even like there's the overall why of the organization, right? And then, like you've said several times, is why are we doing this? Why are we on social media? Why are we, right? Why do we go straight to tactics? But even at that organizational level, right? So you deal with a lot of mission driven organizations. What I found too is over time, there's this thing called mission drift, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we were really clear at the start, right, of why this thing was started. But once we start growing and adding more people to the team, that why can be, oh, yeah, it's way back there in the past. We did that one thing one day, but now we've become all things to everyone in order to raise more money, right? It's like, well, if we just do this and this. So when you're doing that, when you're starting with why, are you taking organizations all the way back to the original why? And if so, what kind of insights does that typically?
We actually don't. We don't go
Okay.
back to the original
Yeah.
why.
All
And
right.
here's why we don't. Oftentimes, just like people, just like organizations and places and organizations evolve. right? And
Mhm.
so what we really try to do is understand what is the why of today. And one of the things that I learned in my healthcare days was you really want to mimic the language that people use in real life,
Right.
those conversations that they're going to have with donors or with an executive director or a salesperson if you're a mission driven organization, and you want to try to mimic that language in all of your other things. So that way it feels like very meshed, right? Versus if you're saying something to somebody and it feels very different, that creates friction. And so what we try to do is we actually try to start with where are we today,
Mhm.
and can we clearly articulate the why behind that? Because the likelihood that the mission actually didn't start with a why, I love the credit that you give to organizations who are like, we had a super clear why. Did they? Or did they just have a really great, how do we solve this one singular problem?
Mhm.
Because likely that is what, and that's how most organizations have started over the years, is like, oh, we have a how to the problem, or we have a how as a way to fix the challenge that somebody is having. And now we need to re engineer or reverse engineer the what, and then go beyond that and reverse engineer the why. And so, what we try to do is we try to like meet folks where they are and get out of the how is this service delivered? How is this product delivered? And jump into what is the problem that we're solving,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
might be a good transition into the next framework.
Yeah, there you go. Before we do that, because I want to get there,
Yeah,
is so when you're talking about the why, right? Then is it more why do you want to raise this money? Why do you want to start this campaign? Why will this make a difference in the lives of the people you communicate? Is that the direction you're?
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
those are really, really excellent questions. And yeah, I would say that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So.
Got it. Okay, cool. So now you're right. Let's take that next step. So now we know the why, right? And any business can do this. Any organization can ask these questions to know the why first, to start with why, as Simon Sinek said. But now we got to do something, right? We still need a what and a how. So what frameworks does Tellwell pick up here?
Yeah. So our next one is once we figured out the why, now we need to start being able to share that story. And so within storytelling, there are so many different frameworks. Pixar has their own framework. There's a 3-act structure. Our go-to is one called the hero's journey. The hero's journey is really a storytelling framework as old as time, kind of like uh, Aristotle is given the credit for the original version. In the 70s and 80s, it was really like starting to be documented by Joseph Campbell. And I think he narrowed it down to like 34 steps within the hero's journey. And then in the 2000s, Donald Miller introduced building a story brand, which is a really excellent way to do it. And that broke it down to 7 parts. And then from there, we've kind of narrowed it down even a little bit further. Yeah, I, I guess there was a dog in my office.
That's
So,
that.
so we,
Bring your dog to work day. I love it. So now you were
I was
just
gonna
going
say,
to go. You were just going to go through
yeah,
all 34 steps of. No, I'm kidding.
let's do it. All 34, starting with one. But really, like you break it down, and the whole idea is you need to position whoever you're helping or whoever you're talking to as the hero of the story. Because when people can see themselves as the hero, they then want to live up to that.
Now let's
What?
let me pause there for a second too,
Yeah.
because this is such a big deal, right? I can't tell you how many websites I go to that are we're the best this in town. We're the best that. It's all very us, we, making the business the hero, right?
Mhm.
So or the organization the hero. How do you help organizations make that transition where it's like, hey, you know what? Really? Now that we know the why, you need to talk about yourself less.
So part of it is they need a role. And they know that they need a role, but
Yeah.
they're not sure how do we then reposition ourselves from saying like we're just the best X, Y, and Z. Well, what we do is we position them as the helpful guide. Because in that same way that my dad mentioned, like the best way to show somebody that you love them is to teach them something, the best way to show your audience that you love them is to guide them into their heroic ending. And so by positioning ourselves as the guide, audience as the hero, we then get to be that helpful guide along the way that helps them get to their heroic ending. And guess what? We still get the credit. We still get love, right? So we're like the Yoda to their Luke Skywalker. We're the Haymitch to Katniss. And so
Yeah.
I think that there's just like a really powerful thing that happens when we reposition ourselves as the guide, and the audience as the hero.
Yeah, and it was so insightful, right? Like from Joseph Campbell and then reinterpreted through Donald Miller to understand that the reason you don't want to be the hero is the hero is indecisive. They're weak. They don't know if they have what it takes to get it done. Right? You think of Luke Skywalker and all of the emotions that he's dealing with, right? Of can I do this? And not knowing his sister and who his dad and like all this, like wanting to rush in and be impulsive all the time. And you've got the wise Yoda, right? If you just listen to Yoda, things are going to go better. And it was such a big unlock. And I think when you do have time to explain that whole thing to businesses, they're like, aha, okay, right? I get it. Okay, so then you position the audience as the hero, the organization as the guide. Then what? What's the rest of the frame?
Yeah. But then you really have to establish, why does this guide know what they're talking about? Do they know what they're talking about? Are they uniquely equipped to help me solve my problem? And so that's really where we establish empathy first and authority second. Any great like sales organization or any great like salesperson or really any great storyteller will share with you why they understand what it is you're going through because they've been there or because they've seen it or because they felt it themselves.
Yeah.
But then you have to layer it on because it's not just enough for, Aunt Kathy to say, "Oh, I understand what you're going through." Then you have to establish your authority. Why are
Yeah.
you uniquely equipped to be helping to solve this problem? And so that authority spot is actually where most people are starting. The authority is where we've been around for 10 years. We've won hundreds of awards. We have helped organizations raise millions of dollars. We have helped XYZ do A, B, and C.
Yeah. Yeah. They want to jump right to the authority. But now go back to Haymitch and Katniss, right? What was his empathy and authority?
So his empathy was he had been through it. He won the Hunger Games, which was
Yeah.
wild, right? And there are only a few of them that actually live.
Yeah.
So um, so yeah, his empathy was that he understands everything that they've been through because he's been through that himself,
Yep.
and his authority is also that he lived through it and he's coached others in how to do it.
Now, okay, so let's finish out the framework. Once we've established empathy and authority, what are the final steps in the framework?
We have to call them to action. We have to give them something to work towards. And the way that we do this is we have to give people a really, really simple plan. People remember three things. So, Nathan, here's a tough one. If you're on fire, what are you going to do?
Stop, drop, roll.
Nailed it. This one's a little bit of a harder one. This is a 201. What do you do when you approach a train crossing?
Stop, look, listen.
Yes. Okay. Very good. That's awesome. What's funny is like everybody gets a stop, drop, and roll one. We have about, I don't know, probably 50% that get like the stop, look, listen. But the reason that we create these is because we can remember three things, right? That is what we're like equipped to do. If you need to add on a fourth, we might be able to do that. But as soon as you get to 5+, you lose people altogether. And
That's
so what
why
you want to do.
whenever I go to church, it's a 3-point sermon, right? It's like
Mhm.
just like clockwork.
Yes. It's because we can retain three things. We can retain three quick lessons. We can retain three quick instructions. But the moment we get beyond that, we start to get lost because we're like, okay, I got to remember those things. What order were they in, etc. And so where we are now is we give people that plan, that very simple plan. And so it could be to say, engage with our organization, like book a call or learn about our organization, book a call. And then the third part, we always try to reposition as what is that heroic outcome going to be? So it could be like learn about Tellwell, engage by you know booking a call, and three, get your donors to start loving you again.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
That might be our three-part plan.
Okay, cool. All right, so now, right, you talked earlier about how frameworks don't sap creativity. They give it structure. They give it form that
Mhm.
allows creativity to flourish. When I worked in an ad agency, right, we had this creative director who would say, "Okay, in order to get this project done, I need 3 months and a budget of $200,000." Right, and the principals would typically come back and say, "You've got 2 weeks and $20,000." Right, so it's like it's just putting those constraints in place, and guess under which scenario he typically did better work. Right, it was the
I would guess a smaller budget, smaller time frame.
yeah, for sure. Right.
Yep.
But for Tellwell, you use these frameworks, but the point is creativity, right? So you're a creativity studio, and specifically not an agency. So now that we've got these frameworks in mind, how do you specifically deploy them? Even though you've talked a little bit about it along, and how does it seed the creativity that comes from your studio?
Yeah. So I think in a couple of different ways this comes to life. I think one, as we figure out like why are we sharing this story in the first place? What is the framework that we're using to share that story and to develop that story? The how is really how do we deliver that story to folks and how do we keep it fresh? Because most organizations, their story doesn't change significantly from year to year or month to month. And so, how do we keep refreshing that through a new lens? And we do that through a framework that we call Seasons of Story. Now, this one is actually one that we created, and it's kind of inspired by my grandpa Herb. My grandpa Herb was a master storyteller, and he knew just like the right points at which to be like inviting somebody in, creating what is called narrative transportation, where we could see ourselves in the story. And he was really, really good at identifying those different things. And so what I started to think about was like different folks are connecting with different stories during different seasons because they kind of naturally align with where we are. And so as we talk about this, when especially in the upper Midwest, as we're getting really excited for spring, we're so excited about like reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with each other. Right, the patios open up. We want to do happy hour on the patio. We're reconnecting and we're re-energizing. And so that is our spring energy.
Mhm.
Our summer energy is all about building trust. And so as we're building trust, we're continuing to like garner these stories, bring these stories in. For nonprofit season, as we head into fall, that's really our that's our Super Bowl. That's our call to action time because we know that the majority of giving is done at the end of the year. And so when we have these great stories, we created connection, we cultivated those stories, and now it's time to like harvest those, share those out with the world so that way we can invite people into the mission. That's our fall energy or our harvest. And then finally, we come back to winter. And winter is our time for like, warming up with some good soup and a candle, but it's also our time for reflection and gratitude. We get to share with folks that like, hey, you gave us your dollars. This is what we did with those dollars here. And so we have a whole framework for this. I'm sure we can give it to folks in the show notes. But that's how we actually then deliver it and keep those stories fresh every single month and every single season.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Love it. Right. End with the proprietary framework. I love it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now now let's shift back to Tellwell.
Yeah.
What does Tellwell look like today? We talked about starting as a side hustle, right? Before side hustles were kind of a thing. And then having that moment, your crisis moment, right, where it's like, okay, we're going to go all in. What does Tellwell look like today?
Yeah. So Tellwell today is a creative studio We're 12 folks strong. We have a really incredible video team, a great design team, and then supported by project managers. We have a chief of staff. Our controller is my dad, a retired school superintendent who was very used to every penny has to be accounted for in public education. And so that's taken a little bit of coaxing to be like, hey, it's okay. We can buy some Diet Coke. It's all good. Um, but today, very specifically, we're not an agency, because the idea behind a marketing agency is their job is to go out and find the best people to do the work for an organization, and as an agent, they are supposed to be like the advocate for the client to say, like, we just go out and find the best people. Now, marketing agencies of today, a lot of those folks are in-house, but they're still not necessarily doing the really hard work to go find the best person for the job. So we are a creative studio. And as a creative studio, we are collaborative. We're wildly hands-on. We are human first. We don't outsource our work. When you come to us, we're the people that you're going to be working with. And by coming to Tellwell, you're kind of buying into our process as well. So we're going to start with why, and we're going to have those weird and hard conversations, and we're going to push and pull, and we're going to rumble a little bit on like, what is the real why here? And have we purposefully articulated it? And then does that why translate into the what are the products and services that we're offering? And then are we connecting the how that's delivered to that original brand promise? And that goes back to our why. And so we can rumble on that. So we're like consultants, but not like the icky consultants that will give you a 70 slide deck type of a thing. There's nothing wrong with it. Those folks are great too. What we try to do is we try to create realistic approaches to how do we, one, uncover our stories, but then how do we share those stories to invite more folks in? So yeah, we're a creative studio, and yeah, that's most of what we do. And our whole point is to kind of co-create, because our job is not to create the stories for our story makers. We refer to our clients as the story makers because we're the storytellers, they're the story makers. Our job is to help them, like, help pull those stories out of them and then share those. Right? Our job is not to create narratives and storylines that don't exist. Ours are really to, like, how do we identify the true, authentic stories and then share those with the world?
Yeah. All right. I love that. You're the storytellers helping the story makers get that story out of them and out to the world. Now, as you said, growing studio, 12 people, but yet 12 people has a limited universe of people that you can help. And another thing that I found really compelling about your story, Max, is how you want to democratize storytelling, right? You want to make it available to everyone. So let's end there with talking about the future of Tellwell and how you want to make storytelling more accessible to the masses of mission-driven organizations.
Absolutely. This is what gets me really excited because, like, I love when people have healthy budgets and we can help them produce an incredible film, an incredible documentary about their organization. That is going to get even more supporters excited, right? When folks want to come to us and they want to reinvent their brand, and to be able to connect with more folks, that gets me so excited. And I also see all of the nonprofits out there and the mission driven organizations that don't have that budget and won't have that budget for a while. And that's okay because that's also how we started. One of the things that we were talking about right before we pressed record was like the incredible nature of AI. And AI is so scary to people, but I do think as we talk about that idea of democratizing storytelling, storytelling is not an inherent thing. It is not something that's just built into people. Storytelling is a formula, and there are definitive formulas on what call people to action. And I think once we start embracing tools like AI, and specifically, I wouldn't suggest going into the wildly niche ones. This is what we were talking about too. Like, learn how to chat with ChatGPT. Learn how to talk to Claude, which is Anthropic's learning and language model. Learn how to talk to Gemini and those, and
Yeah.
and then ask them, what are the frameworks that I should be using to connect with this audience? And so what we're doing right now is we're actively creating some little AI tools that are built on top of these other platforms. We are not pretending to be
Yeah.
like, we are not that type of data nerd. I may have come from tech, but like not that kind of a data nerd where like I can understand how language
Mm.
learning models work. It's wild. And it is the Wild West. And part of what I'm guessing you're saying, and I'm saying too, is that every time Google Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude is coming out with a new tool, what they're doing is they're killing, they're just murdering like probably 100 AI startups in real time. And
Right.
so as we talk about that idea of democratizing storytelling, what I would encourage you to do is get some really great frameworks in your tool belt. And so those can be ones like the Tellwell funnel, introduce, educate, engage, and remind, which is just a little communications framework that
Mm.
says every time I'm going into a conversation, every time I'm giving a speech, every time I'm trying to connect with an audience, I first have to introduce who is it that we're talking to. I have to educate them on our DNA. I have to engage them and call them to action. And then I have to remind them that I love them so that way they remember that they love me too. And so, like, that is one little framework. And if you plug that in to a chat GPT or a Claude or something along those lines,
Yeah.
it can spit out to you really nicely polished stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Think about that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Finish that
oh,
thought.
I was just going to say, so what we're doing is we're really like trying to create all of these and bring all these frameworks into these things that are built on top of OpenAI and Anthropic. So that way it you don't have to pay an extra 40, 50, $60 a month for this very, very specialized tool, but it already exists. And what we're doing is we're just providing to you the questions to ask or the questions to answer to get the best out of it.
Yeah. Quick question. Have you played around with Donald Miller's StoryBrand.ai?
I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I feel, I think Donald Miller is a godfather of marketing right now. I think he's doing some incredible work. But really, all StoryBrand.ai is asking you all of the same questions, but it's doing it in a way that then is going to give you a very repeatable outcome. And so, if you think about this, one of the best ways to interact with AI, and this is something that I learned from Jeff Woods, and he has a book called The AI Driven Leader, and it is a very, very simple formula, which is simply identify what the task is. Then give it as much context as you can. Think about it as though you're like explaining it to an eighth grader. Give it as much context as you possibly can. Context. And then what you're going to do is you're going to ask it to ask you 3 to 5 questions,
Yeah.
one single question at a time. And that's an important one because, again, as humans, when we get overwhelmed, we start to get a little bit lazy because we're just like, I don't
Mhm.
know what to do with this. So you literally ask ChatGPT or Claude to say, ask me up to 5 questions, one single question at a time, and treat it like a conversation. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to have the conversation with it so that way it can get all of your context out. If you do that, you are going to be so far ahead of 89% of marketers and so-called like AI experts out there
Yeah.
just by doing that one thing.
Yeah. Huge. Right. Because AI, those LLMs are programmed to give you a response. So
Mhm.
whatever you ask, they're going to respond, right? But if you say just that simple, ask me 3 to 5 clarifying questions so that you have all the information you need in order to fulfill the task, you're going to be light years ahead. All right, great. This has been such a good conversation, Max.
Yeah, this is fun.
In the spirit of democratizing storytelling, For someone listening right now who wants to tell better stories in their business, what's just one thing they can start doing? What's one piece of advice from this conversation or from your experience that would help them get started?
Go to your About page on your website right now. Identify how many times it's talking about us. It's talking about we. It is talking about like the organization itself, our origin story, who we help, and those types of things. And then what you do, copy and paste, copy that, control A, grab everything, throw it into Chat GPT, and say, I want to reposition this from us language to you language. Start talking to your audience and start talking with your audience, because the moment that they can start to see themselves in your story, you are going to connect so much faster, so much better. Because when the story is about us, we believe as buyers that they're forcing us into a system versus helping us to see our heroic outcomes. So change that we language to you language. And that is one thing that will just change your story.
Love it. Well, Max, this has been great. We've gotten a storytelling masterclass here in about just over a half an hour. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It was so good chatting with you.
Right. And for all of you tuning in to Building Love Businesses, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. And until next time, keep building a business that the world can love.